Australia is gearing up for potential conflicts and has secured formidable allies. The US Congress has greenlit the AUKUS deal, allowing the sale of advanced nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. This agreement not only permits the transfer of highly classified nuclear submarine technology, but also positions the UK and Australia as the exclusive recipients of these advanced systems. In response to regional tensions, Australia has forged strategic partnerships with the US and the UK, resembling the collaborative nature of NATO. Acquiring nuclear submarines, missiles, and enhancing its military capabilities, Australia finds itself in a precarious situation, especially given existing strains with adversaries.
US Congress has passed legislation allowing the AUKUS deal to go ahead.
Allowing the sale of AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines to Australia.
The US will share its highly classified nuclear submarine technology.
Over recent years, Australia has significantly expanded its military presence and budget, reflecting a heightened state of readiness for what appears to be an impending conflict. The primary focus of this preparedness is a potential confrontation with China, often depicted as the formidable dragon of the East. China accuses Australia of fueling domestic nationalism, contributing to the escalating conflict. Australia's decision to assert itself on the global stage has intensified this geopolitical rivalry. Notably, there has been a substantial 133% increase in defense spending over the forward estimates, underscoring the gravity of Australia's commitment to fortify itself against potential threats. Australia is facing a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape, with China actively pursuing the establishment of a network of military bases. This has led to a substantial increase in defense funding for the 2023-2024 fiscal year, surpassing $50 billion for the first time in history. To put it into perspective, this translates to just over 2% of Australia's entire gross domestic product being allocated to defense, marking a substantial financial commitment as the nation readies itself for future challenges. The funding boost is not just a mere statistic. It signifies a proactive response to the rising influence of a more formidable Chinese military presence. The allocation includes investments in advanced military assets such as nuclear submarines, the cutting-edge F-35 Lightning aircraft, and sophisticated anti-ship missiles. Furthermore, the unprecedented scale of permanent American military presence on Australian soil adds another layer to this strategic equation. The current deployment is at levels not witnessed since the Second World War, emphasizing the seriousness with which Australia is approaching its preparations for potential future conflicts. This collaborative effort with the United States reflects a shared commitment to regional security and stability. Australia's recent surge in military activity has raised questions about the timing and the perceived threat prompting such actions. Why is Australia taking these steps now? And what danger is prompting this response? The involvement of China, the United States, and the UK adds complexity to the situation, making it a geopolitical puzzle that demands understanding. Australia, not typically in the forefront of military powers, has suddenly escalated its military capabilities with support from the United States and the UK. Despite being known for peacekeeping efforts and having more kangaroos than people, Australia is now gearing up to become a formidable force, delving into multi-billion-dollar military acquisitions like the F-35A Lightning aircraft and air-to-air missiles. This shift begs the question, why is a nation known for defense-oriented actions preparing for a more aggressive stance? The catalyst for Australia's military buildup is none other than its largest trading partner, China. The relationship between trade and security takes center stage. How can a nation's economic ally also pose a significant security threat? The answer lies in China's robust military expansion. With an escalating arms race and a confrontational foreign policy, China's actions raise concerns about potential military conflicts, exemplified by Australia's decision to bolster its defense capabilities. China's assertive approach on the global stage is characterized by what many describe as aggressive behavior akin to bullying. This perception is not unfounded, as China has a history of using trade sanctions as a tool to exert pressure on other nations. Notable examples include Canada, Japan, Lithuania, Mongolia, Norway, the Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan, all of which have faced the brunt of China's economic coercion. Even the US Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, has explicitly labeled China's actions as bullying. Now, imagine a bully who not only employs economic tactics, but is also arming themselves. The risk becomes substantial, especially when this is happening approximately 1,200 miles away from Australia's borders, as evident in China's activities in the Solomon Islands. The crux of the matter is that China's military buildup directly impacts Australia's interests, creating a tense scenario. Let's delve into how this bullying behavior has specifically affected Australia, unfolding a narrative with an unexpected twist. The saga began in the early 2020s during the pandemic when then Prime Minister Scott Morrison supported an inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. This move seemingly displeased China. One might question why China would react strongly if it had nothing to hide. The situation escalated when China's ambassador to Australia cautioned against the path Australia was taking and hinted at potential consequences for Australian products. True to the warning, China initiated a campaign of economic coercion, leveraging its significant role as a consumer of Australian goods. Considering China's substantial consumption of Australian products, being its largest consumer, the Chinese Communist Party believed they held substantial leverage. This economic pressure became a powerful tool for China to express discontent and assert dominance, showcasing how geopolitical tensions can spill over into economic realms with significant consequences for nations like Australia. Australia boasts an abundance of valuable resources, not referring to the myriad of creatures that can be hazardous, but rather the actual raw materials. China, as the world's manufacturing hub, heavily relies on such resources, establishing a symbiotic economic relationship between the two nations. However, this harmonious partnership took a hit when China, driven by its desire to influence Australia's stance on COVID, initiated a market blockade in 2020. Under the guise of fabricated concerns about trade practices and pest infestations, China abruptly halted imports from Australia. This move dealt a staggering blow to Australia's export economy, resulting in a substantial $16 billion loss. The intention was clear. China sought to undermine Australia's economic backbone as a form of retribution for Australia's divergent COVID position. As China implemented boycotts on Australian goods, it was apparent that Australia's economy had become heavily reliant on China over the years. In 2005, exports to China accounted for 11% of Australia's outbound trade, but by 2020, this figure had surged to 37%. Despite this significant dependence, Australia's strategic bet on China was primarily centered around international trade. Despite not having substantial China-based subsidiaries, Australia found itself vulnerable due to its high dependency on China. In 2020, a staggering 88% of Australia's GDP was tied to China, surpassing even the exposure of the United States and coming close to that of Germany. However, there was a silver lining for Australia. China's economy was equally dependent on Australian resources, highlighting the interconnected nature of their economic relationship. In an ironic twist, China's attempts to exert pressure on Australia ended up causing self-inflicted wounds. The focus on attacking Australia neglected the potential for mutual damage. Some crucial commodities, like Australian iron ore, were irreplaceable for China, leading them to avoid targeting these resources. Additionally, many affected Australian exporters adapted by finding alternative markets. For instance, when China imposed an 80% tariff on Australian barley, producers redirected their sales to other Asian countries. Furthermore, China's actions had unintended consequences. Chinese beer makers forced to purchase barley from other countries experienced a decline in the quality of their product. Similarly, when China blocked Australian coal shipments, it turned to Russia and Indonesia for supply. This in turn created a shortage for India and Japan, prompting Australia to meet their demand. Amidst these shifts, rising world prices proved beneficial for Australian miners, contributing to increased profits. Australia endured substantial hardships during this period, with the lobster and wine industries taking the hardest hits. The political crisis was further fueled by China's propaganda machinery, which, fueled by CCP sentiment, vehemently criticized Australia. Almost all official contacts between the two nations were frozen as a result. The pain felt by Australia was far from insignificant, particularly affecting key industries like lobster and wine. However, Australia managed the crisis politically, and China's overreach inadvertently assisted in this regard. China's propaganda machine, heavily influenced by CCP sentiments, launched a fierce campaign against Australia. In November 2020, the Chinese embassy in Australia publicly listed 14 grievances with the Australian government, extending beyond economic issues. China expressed dissatisfaction with members of Australia's parliament, criticizing the Communist Party and Australian news outlets, publishing unfriendly or antagonistic reports on China. In response, Australia's Prime Minister brushed off these complaints, essentially stating, "That's just Australia being Australia." The situation at the time gave the impression of a calculated miscalculation on China's part, as seen in the headline. Fortunately for the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, a change in government in Australia provided a tactical opportunity for them to de-escalate. Since the change in leadership to Prime Minister Albanese's government, Australia has been cautious not to unnecessarily provoke China. The government actively works to dispel notions of being a sore winner, emphasizing its commitment to respectful dealings with China. Essentially, Australia's government is trying to avoid worsening the situation by not rubbing in its victories and maintaining a balanced approach in its interactions with China. Having a Chinese military base so close to Australia poses a significant security risk. Picture this. Chinese troops and naval warships stationed less than 1,200 miles from the Australian coast. It's like having a potential threat right at your doorstep. If tensions rise between China and Australia, there's a real concern about a direct military confrontation because China's military is practically next door. Recent incidents add fuel to this worry. Just last year, Australia raised objections when a Chinese fighter jet aggressively crossed paths with an Australian aircraft patrolling international airspace over the South China Sea. This kind of behavior is a clear source of conflict. There was a similar incident involving a Chinese J-16 dangerously approaching a U.S. Air Force plane. The U.S. Defense Secretary expressed concern, calling it another troubling case of aggressive flying. Australia is worried about China's actions in the region and is strengthening ties with the US to enhance security. China's goal seems to be dominating Asia, causing concerns for stability. The fear is not just about what might happen, but that China wants unrivaled authority. Australians are uneasy about China's control through economics and military might. A report states, "The question is not what threat is Australia facing, but how many." Australia is preparing for potential military issues and has formed the AUKUS alliance with the UK and US to enhance regional security. AUKUS was initially for submarines, but expanded to include military collaboration in the Indo-Pacific region to counter China's influence. How do you think such alliances impact global stability? Let's know your thoughts in the comment section.